Ka-chung! That German locomotive engineer looked out, and all across the right-of-way was a military barricade made out of sandbags and barbed wire and combat troops. And to make the point clear, sitting on the railroad tracks itself with his cannon facing the locomotive's headlight was a Russian Tu-34 main battle tank. They weren't messing around. Russia just cut off resupply to West Berlin. The chess game was open. Now, at the Yalta and the Potsdam conferences, the Western Allies agreed that once Germany was defeated, it would be occupied by all four powers, with the British in the north and the French in the west and the Russians in the east and America the rest. And Berlin itself, even though it was 100 miles inside the eastern sector, would also be subdivided among all four of those powers. And that was a problem for Stalin. He did not want his people exposed to a democracy. He did not want his people exposed to consumer goods. So he made his opening gambit and closed off the Autobahn, the land route, closed off the rail route, closed off the canals and the rivers to shut down West Berlin, to isolate it. And there wasn't much anybody could do about it. All that remained were 3 20-mile wide air corridors. From Hamburg in the north to Gatow Airport in Berlin, from Rhein-Main to Tempelhof, and then the airport in the French section at Tegel. Stalin didn't believe anybody could resupply a city of 2.3 million people who were surrounded, cut off, isolated. Now, he knew that eventually, when the Americans and British and French could no longer supply the Berliners with food to keep them alive, the Berliners would turn on the Allies and run them out and embrace the Russians and the East, if for food, for no other reason. Stalin hated Germany. Twice in the last 30 years, Germany had invaded Russia, killing tens of millions of Russians. And Stalin wanted Germany crushed underneath his boot. And he knew that the Americans and British and French couldn't hold out in Berlin. And that's exactly the same thing the American generals counseled President Truman. They said, look, we don't have any troops to do anything about it. We let everybody go home after the war. There's one mixed division left in Germany from all different kinds of outfits, and there's one reserve unit in France, and that's it. No, we can't do anything militarily. Maybe we should go ahead and leave now before they throw us out. Truman said, no. Free people, democracies, do not run from dictators. We just fought a war about that. No. We will resupply West Berlin by air, full stop. And thus was Operation Vittles born. Now, you need the right tool for the job, and in this case, just happen to have the right tool. The brand new United States Air Force, who was created the year before, 1947, and learning from their mistakes. The United States Air Force realized that in order to accomplish the mission, it needs the skills and abilities and dedication of everybody. And the U.S. Air Force became the first American institution to completely desegregate, to completely integrate. The lesson of the Tuskegee Airmen was undeniable. African Americans trained to fly the P-51 fighter, to escort the bombers. They were so good that not one bomber they ever escorted was ever shot down by an enemy fighter. And the most racist person in the air crew was delighted to look out and see right on schedule, right on time, a flight of those red-tailed P-51s there to take care of business. Now we're talking about air cover. Then The next thing we need after the Air Force is we need a general to lead it. Turns out we got one. The brilliant logistics planner who figured out how to fly the hump, how to resupply our allies in western China and northern Burma by flying supplies from India over the hump, over the Himalayan mountains. He was the man to lead this. Now in Berlin, General Clay had thought ahead and stockpiled enough food for the whole city for 26 days and enough coal for 45 days. So General Tunner said, well, what do we need? What does a city of 2.3 million people use in a day? Turned out to be daunting. 180,000 tons of cereal, 200,000 tons of flour, 160,000 tons of sugar, 160,000 tons of salt, 70,000 tons of fat, 180,000 tons of fresh meat and fresh fish, 180,000 tons of prepared food, packaged food, canned food, plus 40,000 tons of medical supplies, plus infant formula, plus everything else to keep 2.3 million people alive. Came out to 2,500,000 tons. And that wasn't the bad part. The bad part was that the power station was in East Berlin. And the Russians trimmed it back so that West Berlin only got electricity from midnight to 2 a.m. And they lowered the gas pressure into West Berlin, which meant those planes also had to bring 2.5 million tons of coal and heating oil, which came to a grand total of 5.1 million tons a day, every day. So General Tunner said, well, what do we have? We have an entire fleet of our C-47 Skytrains, our very useful flying pickup trucks, used across the military, everything from hauling paratroopers to flying jeeps and supplies. Let's make a maximum effort, 24-hour maximum effort, and let's see what our numbers are at the end of that 24 hours. And so it began inside the cockpit of a C-47. So, Second Lieutenant Katzman, what do you think about your first flight into Berlin? I can't believe we're flying, sir. I can't believe we're in this weather. I can't believe anybody flies in this weather. Is there a name for this kind of weather? Do the pilots in Germany have a name for this weather? Yeah, we call it Wednesday. Okay, we're coming up on the IP. That's when the training kicked in for that young second lieutenant, first flight or not. Okay, throttles are set at 24 inches of manifold pressure, fuel mixture set at full rich, and landing gear going down. Main gear down and lock, tail wheel down and lock, green, green, green. Flaps are down full. Cowl flaps are open, landing lights are on, props are set, flaps are set, checklist complete, we're ready to land. Roger that. Tempelhof Tower, this is 029er, turning on final. Request GCA IFR. It's a little muddy out here today and a little bumpy too. Those air crew were always happy when the Women's Air Force ground control approach operators were on duty. Those young men were a long way from the women in their lives, their wives and sweethearts and moms and sisters and daughters and very best friends. It was like a voice from home, confident, expert, professional, reaching up into the swirling void to shine the way. Roger, 029er, this is ground control approach. You need not acknowledge any of my transmissions. I have you over the outer marker at 120 knots. Cut your speed to 110. You are on course, you are on glide path. Current conditions are quarter-mile visibility and variable, 300-foot ceiling and variable. Patchy ground fog, snow flurries, occasional crosswind from the 90 degrees, gusting 12 to 15 knots. You are on course, you are dropping a little below your glide path. Cut your speed to 100 knots. 029er, you are on course, you are a little below glide path. Pull your nose up. 029er, you are on glide path, you are on course. You are going to drop off my scope in a minute. You should have visual of the runway now. You're going to drop off my scope. You are on course, you are on glide path. Visual, all I can see are apartment buildings off the starboard wingtip, and I am looking up at people on balconies. We're going to see one of two things really quick. Either a runway or a grandma in a bright light. Here we go. Bark, bark. Tires screeched up to speed. Pull back on the throttle. Bark. Tail wheel settled in. A 029er is down. Thank you, GCA. 029er clear. And then those two air traffic controllers in the trailer and the two pilots in the cockpit. All four made the same face at the same instant. And then air traffic control said, "Welcome to Berlin." A follow me Jeep magically swirled into existence and slowly led them creeping in between all the ghost-like specters of other aircraft unloading their cargo all around them. The Luftwaffe ground crew was there to volunteer to bring them in with expert ability. And just as in baseball, it's the same in aviation. Safe. When the chalk's in, watch the ballet begin. Loadmaster went back and opened up his cargo doors, and a big trailer backed up to it filled with German volunteers. People delighted to help unload each and every one of those aircraft that came in, because they knew those aircraft were there to keep them alive, and they were joyous in their spirit and deep in their thanks. The leader of the crew leaned over and looked in the airplane, and he said, "Call!" Immediately the tailgate came back up, the slot went back in, now it's a dump truck. Then they brought out two long half tubes and run it up their front, because they changed the job from lifting and carrying bags of coal to lifting and sliding bags of coal. Zoom, 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 zoom. And after they got the first pallet empty and pulled out of the way, then the oldest man and the oldest woman made their way forward. Far past doing hard labor, they were not past their expertise, and that's what was needed now. They had an entire lifetime of sweeping, and sweeping that aircraft is exactly what they did, and it was important. It needed their expertise because it's a matter of life and death. Coal dust and flour dust are very explosive, and you need those brooms out there to take care of that, to make sure it will not happen. And every one of those planes were swept absolutely clean. Pilots had enough time to walk into flight ops and look at the latest weather map, have a quick cup of joe, grab a bag of donuts to take back to the crew. Got to get back in the air. Clear one. Clear two. Tempelhof 029er, ready to go. At the end of the 24 hours, they looked at the numbers, and what they found was sad. It was less than 1 million tons. But, happily, there were answers available. Already, the British were flying into Gatow with their ugly, slow, flying barn called the Avro York, but it carried 20,200 pounds of freight. Now, if the problem is one lacking horsepower, well, Americans always have a solution to that. Americans are all about horsepower. Ever since the Duesenberg and Packard V12s and Henry Ford's hot rod flathead V8 and a Harley shovelhead with a Knox bottle, the SR-71 doing 4,000 miles an hour, the Atlas Agena launcher, the Saturn V, America does horsepower. Why just have a high horsepower V8 in your 4x4 when you can have a higher horsepower V10? Who knows? Maybe you might need to yank a fire hydrant right out of the earth. And we had the right tool for the job. the Lockheed C-54 Skymaster 4-engine freight bird. And each one of those 4 Pratt & Whitney double wasp 14-cylinder radial motors were souped up to crank out 2,000 red-hot Detroit horsepower each. And they could carry 32,500 pounds every trip, and 100 knots an hour faster than any transport in the world. Booyah! Somebody say amen. C-54s from all over the world descended into West Germany. Bark, bark, follow me! Bark, bark, follow me! Now there were 2 runways up in the British airport at Gatow, and there were 2 at Tempelhof, and at Tegel, well, Tegel was in the French section, and then the French really couldn't do much to help in the Berlin airlift on account of they were involved halfway around the world trying to reestablish colonialism and trying to turn Indochina back into French Indochina, and, well, wasn't working out that well. However, they could build, and they built a runway there at Tegel. So they had 4 runways at Gatow, 4 runways at Tempelhof, and a runway at Tegel. Bark, bark, follow me. Bark, bark, follow me. Bark, bark. Oh, I say, this way. 3 million tons, 3.2 million tons, 3.6 million tons, 3.8 million tons. Bark, 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 bark. General Tunner had set it up and he called it the Speedway. It was a long, looping oval. And what that was every plane was launched 3 minutes behind the plane in front and 3 minutes ahead of the plane behind. And if you got to Berlin and the weather was so bad you could not land, keep going. Go right around the corner and come all the way back out. If on your way back out weather changed and planes started landing, then you just came back the racehorse track and landed again. If they weren't landing and you couldn't get in, well, you flew back to Wiesbaden or Frankfurt and parked your plane, gassed it up, and waited until you could. Wasn't always an easy thing, and it was usually fairly dangerous. The C-54s only cleared an apartment building on final by 17 feet. And every time one of those birds came in on final, every 3 minutes, the people who lived in that apartment building were hoping it wasn't too foggy. Sometimes it was. 79 American aircrew died reaching out to support those who were isolated and cut off and surrounded by 2 million Russian troops. 79 Americans. When the Russians couldn't make us quit, they started trying to buzz the airplanes in the corridor, buzz in the racetrack, trying to make the Americans dodge and get out of the corridor so they could be shot down as spies. They got closer and closer. Finally, one very unprofessional yak pilot hit a C-54 right where the wing root hits the fuselage. Killed 13 Americans, dropped 30,000 pounds baby formula, and one real bad yak pilot. Bark, 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 bark. 3 minutes, every 3 minutes, every day, every night. 3 minutes. Bark, bark. Rain, snow, sleet. Bark, bark. 4.2 million tons, 4.8 million tons, 5.1 million tons. And then the Air Force unleashed the most unstoppable and most powerful force known, human kindness. Captain Hal Halverson had landed his C-54 there at Tempelhof one sunny day, and while it was being unloaded, he went up the end of the runway and he was taking some shots of the other guys landing their birds and having a little conversation with the rebel kids on the other side of the fence. And he was impressed with them. They knew when the weather turned bad, wouldn't be able to fly in, and they wouldn't have food. And they were trying to say, don't worry about us. We're used to going without food. We'll make it. Don't worry about us. We'll be here in the spring. And it touched Halverson. And then he noticed not one of those kids asked him for anything. Not one of those kids tried to talk him out of candy or gum or money or anything. They were just happy watching the airplanes come in. He looked in his pocket and all he had were 2 sticks of double mint gum. He broke it into 4 and then he cautioned them to pass them out. He was afraid there'd be a fight. But the older kids started methodically breaking it into tiny, tiny tiles and giving it out first to the youngest kids and working their way up. Now, there wasn't enough gum to go around, but when those who didn't have gum were wide-eyed, the older kids tore up the wrapper and spread the pieces of wrapper around so those who could not chew the gum, those who could not taste the gum, could enjoy the scent of the gum. And they did, and they loved it, and it touched Halverson. And he said, tomorrow, I don't know what time I'm flying in, but I'll be looking for you. And when I see you, I'll wag my wings. So when you see a 4-engine airplane wag its wings, that's me. And I'm going to throw a whole bunch of candy down for all you guys. And then he went back to his airplane. He's flying back and he was thinking, all right, how am I going to do this? And it occurred to him, I can't be throwing hard candy out of a moving airplane. I can just see little Gunter trying to catch 100-mile-an-hour almond joy. By the time little Gunter came to, the knot on his head would be so big, all the other kids would name it Little Gunter. Parachutes! I'll do parachutes! And he got everybody in his squadron involved in all the ground crew and got the mechanic shop and everybody got their candy together and cutting up handkerchiefs and rags and oilcloths and old shirts and old dead parachute and making little parachutes. And the next day, just before 11 a.m., he flew in and he looked and there they were. They were all on the rubber pile. He wagged his wings and every one of those kids went, hey! His crew chief threw out a whole spray of little parachutes who came down to delight and joy and laughter and clapping and 2 really cool things. First of the really cool things was an 8-year-old girl named Gisela Ansbach who had never in her young life ever tasted chocolate. And then, magically, out of a loud sky, boom, a Baby Ruth bar. Bark, bark, follow me. She was astonished. Now, 15 years later, in July 1963, Gisela Ansbach would be a young professional woman, a university graduate, who was one of the 200,000 Berliners crammed into the Platz to hear American President John F. Kennedy say, let those who think that democracy is not strong, lass ihn nach Berlin kommen. The proudest claim a free citizen can make. Ich bin ein Berliner. But that was years in the future. 8-year-old Gisela Ansbach looked at that plane and looked at the treasure in her hands, held it close to her chest and ran for home, delighted. Not only that she would finally taste chocolate for the very first time, but that for the very first time she too would provide food for the dinner table. Now she was a provider too, and all of her family could taste chocolate. The other cool thing that happened was a very well-shot, grainy, black and white handheld 8mm movie tone news showing Hal Halverson's bird coming in and a spray of little parachutes going out, and it made headlines and coming attractions all over the world. American flyboys reach out to desperate kids. It was shown everywhere, and it impacted people, and it created Operation Little Vittles. And it started, interestingly enough, back in the States with Gold Star families, moms and dads who had lost their son or daughter fighting in the last war. And those sons and daughters died fighting for the freedom of other people. And so those moms and dads felt that to honor their kids' sacrifice, that they too should fight for the freedom of other people. And it was sending more than candy. It was sending hope. And packages from all over the country started flowing in with handkerchiefs and little parachutes made out of ragtag cloth, and candy of every kind was sent to Halverson's squadron. And more press people were watching the spray of little parachutes and bark, bark, follow me. Every day, more planes, more newsreels. Check, as they say in chess. 6 million tons, 6.6 million tons, 6.8 million tons. Bark, bark, follow me. Bark, bark, follow me. 7 million tons. 8. And then the Allies slammed the door. They agreed to join together and create a new democracy, a new country, West Germany, and a new currency, the Deutschmark, which is the only currency that would be accepted in West Berlin. Checkmate. Here, Mr. Stalin, let me help you knock over your king. We're Americans. Tonk. We don't do kings. Outplayed by Truman, Stalin had to grudgingly relent. And the canals opened up, and the Autobahn opened up. And grudgingly, one by one, the sandbags and the barbed wire all came off, and the tank moved, and the railways were open. Nosvidoya. And that German locomotive engineer, ka-choom,